Let the winds still and the sails unfurl. We are sailing toward the island of Crete, and the night is calm. Let the story begin. Chapter 1. A city in sorrow. In the heart of ancient Athens, a city of stone and salt wind, a quiet sorrow had settled. Though its temples still stood proud, and its streets still rang with the footsteps of daily life, a shadow lingered over its people. Not a shadow of storm or sickness, but one of memory and of dread. Every 9 years, a black-sailed ship left the harbor of Athens. It did not go to trade nor to explore. It carried no hope, only tribute. It had lived in the labyrinth since the day it was old enough to kill. And so Athens paid its price. 14 lives for peace. A grim agreement carved in sorrow. 7 young men and 7 young women, chosen by lot, would board that vessel. He was not yet known in song or marble. His hair was still unmarked by salt or sun, but there was something still. The reunion was quiet, without flourish or feast. But blood knew blood, and Aegeus saw in the boy a strength that did not need shouting, and certain in him, a quiet force that made people turn their heads as he passed. Their destination was Crete, across the Aegean Sea, and beyond the blue curve of the world, where a king ruled with pride and silence. "No," he said, his voice cracking like old stone. "I have only just found you. You do not know what waits in Crete." But on the day he came of age, she took him to a great rock, hidden in the hills, and bade him lift it. "If not, let my death buy them freedom." Beneath it lay a sword and sandals, left there by his father, the king of Athens, long ago. The young men and women stood silent, holding the hands of friends they would not see again. The wind held steady, the stars were kind, but below the surface of calm, each heart on board beat with silent fear. The harbor was quiet as a temple. Even the seabirds did not call. If he could lift the stone, she said, then he was ready to claim his name. He watched until the sails vanished into the horizon. He had told his son, if he should survive the maze and return, to raise white sails on the mast. That way, from afar, his father would know joy instead of despair. The wind touched his brow like a whisper. Behind him, the sea shimmered softly, and Athens, far behind, began to feel like a fading dream. There, in the belly of his palace, lay a maze of such terrible design that no one who entered ever found their way out. His sword, though hidden beneath his cloak, felt heavier with each passing hour. He did not know what lay ahead, only that he must walk toward it. And within that maze, a creature waited. The palace of Knossos stood like a crown above it all, its walls etched with stories too old to name. Half man, half bull, born of ancient wrath and divine insult, the Minotaur. In this time of mourning, a young man named Theseus walked the stony paths of the Acropolis. He had grown in Trozen, far from the city's noise, raised by a mother who spoke little of the past. And so he did. Now he stood in the halls of the palace, in the presence of King Aegeus, his father. When the time came for the drawing of lots, when the names of Athens' youth were chosen once more, Theseus stepped forward. "I will go," he said. There was a stillness in the court. The king's face paled. Theseus did not argue. He only bowed his head. "Then let me be one among them. If I return, it will be with peace." Aegeus wept that night, but he did not stop him. When the ship was readied, its sails dyed black in mourning. Theseus took his place among the chosen. As the ship pulled from the shore, Aegeus climbed to the highest point of the cliffs. Theseus promised. The ship moved like a ghost across the Aegean, its oars cutting cleanly through the soft blue water. Theseus stood at the prow, watching the sea unfold. As dawn broke on the third day, the outline of Crete rose before them, a place of gold and shadow, of palaces like honeycomb, and fields blooming red with poppies. And beneath it, the labyrinth waited. But for now, there was only the hush of approaching land, and the knowledge that soon Theseus would step onto soil that few ever left. He closed his eyes. The story was beginning. Chapter 2. The Palace of Knossos. The ship slipped into the harbor of Knossos, just as the sun cast long golden ribbons over the water, touching the white stone quays with firelight. The sea was hushed, as if it too held its breath. Before the Athenians, the island of Crete rose in sun-drenched tiers, olive groves stepping up the hillsides, flocks of birds circling above groves, and far above all, the palace. It gleamed like a vision of the gods, red-walled and ancient. There were no cheers, no crowd to greet them. Only solemn guards dressed in white linen and bronze, standing motionless at the docks. Behind them stretched a long ascending road, coiling upward like a thread wound toward something hidden. There were no straight halls, only winding passages, arched doors, and corridors that led into gardens, then back into rooms without windows. The air smelled of crushed herbs and old salt. The stars overhead flickered like distant fires. His thoughts circled like ships waiting for the tide. Murals covered the walls, gods with many eyes, serpents curled around altars, tides of blue sea curling into spirals. Light came from skylights or stone grills in the walls, pouring sunlight in from odd angles, throwing long shadows. He wondered how many feet had walked here before him, how many names had gone unremembered. It was a place of silence and symbols, beautiful and strange, as though the world had folded inward. She moved with the certainty of someone who had wandered this maze of walls since childhood. She stepped closer, and he saw her clearly. A young woman not much older than he, with eyes that held both steel and sadness. At its peak stood the Palace of Knossos, its columns thick and red, its upper walls painted with wild colors and impossible scenes. Dolphins swimming in air. In the morning, you will be brought before His Majesty. Leaping bulls with golden horns, dancing figures with bare feet and braided hair. Everything shimmered as though caught between memory and dream. Then it is your brother I am meant to meet. Among the group of 14 Athenians, Theseus stood still and tall, his gaze fixed not on the guards, but on the distant palace itself. Its shape unsettled the eye, sprawling yet seamless, open yet impenetrable. You are not built for sacrifice. You came to end the cycle, not to submit to it. It did not look built, but grown, like a mountain of carved coral rising from the earth. A man approached, cloaked in flowing fabric, his steps silent as mist. If you find him, and if you survive, it will lead you out again. His name was Talos, steward of the king. His hair was tied in a tight knot behind his head, and his voice was gentle, but weightless, as if repeating words that had been spoken many times before. Because I'm tired of feeding the dark. Because I know what my brother is. And because the story could be different. You think you've turned once, and twice, and 30 times. The walls remember nothing, but this thread does. You are welcome in Crete, he said without bow or smile. You will rest tonight. He turned, and they followed. The palace unfolded around them like a slow-turning riddle. Their chambers were modest but clean, with beds of woven reed, copper basins of scented water, and windows that opened toward the sea. That night, while others lay restless in the hush, Theseus sat alone in an open courtyard beneath a fig tree. King Minos sat at the center, wrapped in robes of ivory and scarlet. His face was still, carved from patience and pride. Beside him, Queen Pasiphae gazed into the distance, her expression unreadable. He had heard no screams from the labyrinth, no cries of beasts, and yet the silence itself carried a wake that pressed into the stone. A rustle came from the shadowed path. He rose. A figure stepped into view, slight, robed in deep violet, her hair gleaming under the starlight. "I knew you'd be here," she said. He didn't answer right away. "You're not a servant," he said. But her hand closed around the place where the thread had been. "No," she replied. "I am Ariadne, daughter of Minos, keeper of the maze, sister to the one you came to face." Theseus's breath caught. Her voice held no fear, no shame, only a quiet certainty. He bowed his head. Ariadne looked out at the sky. "You are not the first to come, but you may be the last to leave." They stood in stillness beneath the fig tree, its branches stretching over them like a hand in blessing. "You don't belong here," she said finally. "I came to do what must be done," he answered. She opened her hand. Inside was a spool of thread, golden, impossibly fine, gleaming like strands of morning. "The labyrinth doesn't move, but it confuses." She pressed it into his palm. "Fix the end near the entrance. Let it unravel behind you." He stared at the thread, then at her. "Why would you help me?" Ariadne hesitated. Theseus nodded slowly. "Then I will return this to you." "Return yourself," she said. "That will be enough." The sky lightened slightly as they parted. Morning was near, and with it, the reckoning. At dawn, Talos arrived, his face impassive. The king awaits. Through halls of polished stone, Theseus and the others were led to the throne room, where sunlight poured in from high windows, casting gold across the floor. "Theseus of Athens," Minos said, his voice neither cruel nor kind. "You come of your own will?" "I do." Minos studied him a moment longer. "Then let it be done. At moonrise, the labyrinth shall open, and you shall enter. No ceremony, no cruel declaration, only the calm finality of a closing door." As Theseus turned to go, he glimpsed Ariadne watching from behind a lattice of stone. She did not speak, and that night, beneath a rising moon, Theseus stood before the mouth of the maze, and the thread lay coiled at his feet. Chapter 3. Into the labyrinth. The mouth of the labyrinth waited like a wound carved in the earth. Wide enough to swallow a man, it yawned beneath an archway of stone, half covered by creeping vines and the weight of silence. He had looped the golden strand around his waist, tucked beneath his belt, ready to unwind as he stepped into the darkness. The blade Ariadne had left for him, slim, curved, glinting like frost, hung beside it, silent and sure. There were no guards, no gates, only the hush of moonlight and the brush of wind against ancient stone. Theseus stood at its threshold, the thread tied to a jagged tooth of rock just beyond the entrance. As if the labyrinth remembered those who had passed, as if it carried their echoes still. Above, narrow shafts in the ceiling allowed fingers of moonlight to fall. Dust swirled gently in their glow, as though the labyrinth breathed. The other Athenians had watched him go with wide, hollowed eyes. No one had spoken. Theseus marked each turn with a glance, his hands sure on the thread. He passed an altar of black marble, its surface scratched by nails or claws. He passed bones, small and human, tucked into the corners of quiet rooms, untouched by scavengers or time. But the sense of direction, of time, of up and down, it faded. The walls changed subtly, becoming rougher, closer, then broader, hung with vines, or empty as bone. No two turns were alike. A circular chamber, marked with columns and strange grooves in the floor, grooves that looked, faintly, like tracks, wide, hoofed, deep. Other times it opened suddenly into vast chambers, where shafts of pale moonlight broke through the roof and struck pools of black water. In one, he saw fish with blind white eyes circling beneath the surface. In another, a fresco covered an entire wall, a great bull, rising from the waves, crowned in lightning. What could be said to a man walking into legend? The stone walls grew damp. Water dripped somewhere nearby, echoing like a ticking clock. His steps slowed. The first steps were not dreadful. A corridor stretched ahead, straight and wide, with walls of smooth stone. The thread unspooled behind him with a whisper, but the passage soon curved. Then curved again. Then split, left, right, left, forward, back. There were carvings sometimes, spirals, horns, a bull's head stylized in stone. They did not seem decorative. They felt like memories etched into the walls. He stopped once, listening. No sound. The stillness wrapped him like water. He stepped forward. At times the path narrowed so tightly he had to press sideways to pass. He passed niches where oil lamps sat cold, long burned out. Deep in the passage ahead, a rasping exhale that stirred the dust. Then another. He pressed himself to the wall, every muscle still. And still, no sign of the beast, no howl, no thunder. Just the silence of centuries. Its body, human in shape, but wrong in scale, vast shoulders, arms thick as marble columns, skin the color of old bronze. Scars crossed its chest. Its breath steamed the air. But Theseus could feel it. The watching. He stopped again at a place where the passage split 5 ways. He crouched, pressing his hand into one. Still warm. Stone cracked. Dust exploded. He rolled and rose, blade drawn. The Minotaur turned, slower now, calculating. He rose slowly, tightened his grip on the thread. The blade slid easily into his hand. He chose the center path. Theseus darted beneath it, slicing at its flank. The blade bit deep, and the creature bellowed, not in rage, but pain. Its hand swiped out, almost catching him. He ducked, rolled, struck again, the arm this time. This corridor sloped downward into the earth. The air thickened. The silence now was different, heavy. Then a breath. Past the horns, beneath the arm, straight in, and drove the blade upward. It wasn't his. It came low and long, like the bellows of a forge. Then, from the shadows, the sound of hooves. One, then another. Deliberate, slow. It emerged not with roar, but silence. The Minotaur. And for a moment, saw a boy's face beneath it. A prince. Its head was massive. A bull's crown of horn and fur. Eyes glinting red gold in the moonlight that fell from above. It stopped, stared. Neither moved. Then it charged. Theseus dropped the thread and stepped aside just as the beast struck the wall. It wasn't mindless. It knew what it was. The next charge was tighter, controlled, but it was strong and fast. Faster than he had expected. The third pass, the Minotaur fainted. Theseus lunged and was caught across the chest with a blow that sent him sprawling. He lay still for a heartbeat, stars blooming in his vision. Then a footstep. Closer. Then another. He turned, the blade still in his hand. The thread pulled taut behind him. He waited. The Minotaur stepped forward, head lowered, and Theseus saw, in its eyes, not fury, but exhaustion. It looked tired, ancient, like something that had once been a god, now trapped in the form of a beast. Theseus rose slowly. He did not strike. He waited. And when the creature charged again, this time Theseus stepped forward. The sound it made was not a roar. It was a sigh. The Minotaur fell slowly, as if sleep had taken it. And then silence. Complete. Theseus knelt beside it. His chest heaved. His blade red. He looked into the beast's face. And he whispered, "Rest." Then he turned, took up the golden thread, and began the long path back toward light. Chapter 4. Return through the maze. The silence held. No second beast came. No alarm, no echo of footsteps. Only the hush of old stone breathing in the dark. For a time he remained there, listening. No wind stirred through the chambers. No sound came but his own quiet breath and the distant dripping of water far behind. The golden thread stretched back from his waist, catching glints of light from above, like starlight spun into silk. Theseus knelt beside the fallen Minotaur a moment longer, his hand still trembling faintly around the hilt of the blade. The creature was utterly still now, its heavy limbs sprawled where it had fallen, the expression on its broad face curiously peaceful, almost like a man who had finally escaped a long nightmare. Yet their meaning had changed. They no longer whispered fear or confusion. They simply were. Theseus had walked into the center of the storm and survived. He thought of her standing alone in the shadows of her father's palace, waiting. The moon had lowered, casting silver light across the ground. The thread lay taut from the rock where he had tied it, the same way it had begun. Somewhere a bird called once, then fell silent. And beyond, night and stars and the sound of the sea. Slender, cloaked, her hair caught up in a dark braid that shimmered in the moonlight. She had handed him not only the means of escape, but the quiet certainty that someone believed the monster end could end. And that belief had mattered. What remained now was the long, slow walk home. Theseus slowly rose, one hand on the thread, the other steadying himself against the wall. The pale fish were gone. The water lay still as glass. He turned, and he began the journey back. The labyrinth did not resist him. That was the first thing he noticed. The winding paths remained as they were, but the disorientation had lifted, slightly, as though the spell of the place had softened. He measured time only by the slow unwinding of tension in his chest, by the length of thread still cradled in his palm. His steps were sure, deliberate, though fatigue weighed on his shoulders, and each footfall seemed heavier than the last. Or perhaps it was the thread that protected him. With each turn, he glanced back to ensure the golden line still followed. It did, undisturbed, unwavering. He passed again the deep chamber, where moonlight touched the black pool. He passed the altar with its claw marks and bones, But now the bones seemed distant, ancient, as if they had been laid there centuries before. He did not look closely. The spiral carvings on the walls, the bull-headed murals, even the narrow shafts of cold white light filtering in, all remained. A ship waits. One I prepared. The moon trailed them through the branches, silver shadows flickering across the ground. Time passed strangely in the maze, as always. Minutes stretched into hours. Hours collapsed into heartbeats. As he passed a fork in the path, one of many where a wrong turn would, vehement and endless wandering, he felt a flicker of gratitude for Ariadne. At last, as he rounded a familiar curve and stepped into a narrow, ivy-draped corridor, he saw it. The entrance, still open beneath the carved arch. The sleeping city knew nothing. He stepped out into the cool air of early dawn. A breeze stirred the olive trees. She had seen every twist of the labyrinth from above, had lived among its builders, heard its walls hum with ancient blood, and still she had chosen to betray it, to end it, and then movement. A figure darted toward him from the edge of the trees. Ariadne. She reached him with a breathless sound, part laugh, part sigh, and her eyes scanned him from head to foot, as though to confirm he was not illusion. "You returned," she said. "I promised. Is it done?" He nodded. "He sleeps now, deeper than dreams." For a moment they stood in silence, not as prince and princess, or as hunter and guide, but as two souls caught between endings and beginnings. Then Theseus looked to the horizon. "The others?" "They're safe," Ariadne said. "Still sleeping. They know nothing yet. Then we must go." "Now?" He met her gaze. "They'll come looking. They'll mourn the beast. Your father may not forgive." Ariadne's expression didn't change. "I never asked for his forgiveness." She turned, motioned to a path hidden in the olive grove. "There's a harbor on the eastern coast." Theseus hesitated a moment, not from doubt, but from awe. They moved quickly through the trees, soft-footed and silent. At the harbor, a single vessel sat moored, sails furled, its oars ready. A lean craft, built for speed. Theseus helped Ariadne aboard. The tide stirred faintly. As they pushed away from the dock, the palace at Knossos faded into shadow behind them. No horns sounded. No torches lit the walls. Ariadne stood beside him on the deck, her gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "You'll return to Athens?" she asked. "If they'll have me." "They will. And you?" he said gently. She smiled faintly. "I gave up being a daughter of Minos the moment I handed you that thread." The stars above wheeled slowly, and the sea stretched wide and deep. And behind them, the labyrinth, once a prison, once a tomb, lay still, its spell undone. The voyage had begun. Chapter 5. The Escape. The first light of dawn broke gently across the stone paths of Knossos as Theseus emerged from the mouth of the labyrinth. His clothes were damp with sweat, his sword dulled at the edge, and in his hand the golden thread still trailed, the end now gathered and coiled tightly. When she saw him appear, whole and walking, her breath caught in her throat. Without words, she crossed to him, her hands brushing his arms, as if unsure he was truly there. Behind him, silence settled back over the vast maze. What they had done, defying her father, destroying the creature he hid, was not a quiet thing. The death of the Minotaur would stir wrath, and Daedalus had once warned her. Nothing in Crete escapes the king's notice for long. The air had changed. What once held fear and breathless mystery now felt emptied, as though the labyrinth itself had exhaled. Waiting beyond the olive grove was Ariadne. She had not slept. "You did it," she whispered. He nodded. "It's over." But Ariadne knew it was not. They had no time. While the palace still slumbered, Ariadne led Theseus and the other Athenian youths to the harbor. The maze was hidden now, buried behind forest and stone, but in their minds, its winding corridors still lingered. The ship moved swiftly, guided by a fair wind, cutting across the blue like a silver arrow. Crete became a shadow behind them, then a shape, then a line. Some of the children cried quietly. Others simply stared back, wide-eyed, as if unsure they had truly escaped. It was a quiet procession. The children moved like ghosts, changed by what they had witnessed, what they had survived. Their voices slowly returned, first in whispers, then in laughter. She showed him how to read the stars. He taught her Athenian songs. When the moon rose full one night, they danced in the quiet, their shadows cast long across the deck. It felt, for a time, like the weight of the labyrinth had lifted from them both. The journey, which had begun with fear and blood, began to feel like something else, like rebirth. No words passed between them, only footsteps on stone and the soft rustle of wind over sails. At the docks, a single black-sailed ship waited, the same vessel that had brought the tribute to Crete. Of his father waiting on the cliffs, and he thought of Ariadne, her hand in his, the thread she had given him, the life they might build. She woke beneath a canopy of fig trees, the waves soft in her ears, a folded cloak beneath her head. For a moment she smiled, expecting to see his face above her. Now it would serve as their escape. Theseus helped the others aboard, while Ariadne worked with the crew, whispering hurried instructions. The stars glittered cold above him. Behind his eyes, the Minotaur's face still lingered, not in rage, but in that final moment of stillness. A boy's face, forgotten, doomed. The ropes were cast off, just as the first sounds of the waking city began to rise. Distant bells, the cries of fishermen, footsteps echoing from the higher terraces of the palace. As the sails caught the morning wind, the ship slid silently out to sea. The island receded slowly behind them, its cliffs catching the early light. Ariadne stood at the stern, her hair whipping in the breeze. She did not look back. Theseus came to stand beside her. "Did you leave a message?" he asked softly. She nodded. "In the courtyard, a painted shell on the altar stone. He'll know I'm gone." They stood in silence for a while, watching the sea change color as the sun climbed higher. Theseus spoke again. "Thank you." Ariadne shook her head. "Don't thank me. I couldn't stay. You simply gave me a reason to leave." The ship sailed for days. The sea was kind, and the wind steady. Each evening, the children gathered on the deck, watching the sun fall into the horizon. Ariadne and Theseus spent much of the voyage together. But dreams change with the wind. One night, long after the others had gone below, Theseus stood alone on the deck. He thought of Athens, of his people. But duty was a heavier weight than hope. As they neared the island of Naxos, Theseus made his decision. He did not sleep that night. When the sun rose over the quiet hills of Naxos, he rowed Ariadne gently ashore, but she was alone. The ship was already fading into the morning mist. Chapter 6. Alone on Naxos, Ariadne sat beneath the fig trees for a long while, the leaves rustling gently above her, casting dappled patterns across the rocky shore. The sand was pale and warm. The waves came and went with a steady rhythm. She believed it was a misunderstanding. Perhaps they had anchored elsewhere. Perhaps he had gone in search of something and would return. But as the sun climbed and the mist burned away, the truth grew too clear to ignore. The dark sail had vanished into the horizon, and with it, so had he. As if whispering secrets only the sea had the patience to tell. But the ship Theseus' ship was gone. Trees bore fruit. Springs bubbled up from beneath the rocks. Birds sang. She found a small hollow in the hills and made it hers. A space for sleep, for solitude, for remembering. At first, she walked along the beach in silence, bare feet pressing into the wet sand. Her cloak trailed behind her. Her arms crossed tightly. The sky darkened not with clouds, but with something else. A presence. A weight. Not from cold, but from the sudden absence of everything she had trusted. Like a rising tide. His hair fell in loose curls across his shoulders. His eyes were deep, unfathomable. And as he stepped toward her, the trees seemed to bow in his wake. Sharp then fell silent again. She knew, without needing to ask, that this was no man. At first disbelief, she endured. But here he bore none of the frenzy, none of the chaos she had heard in temple stories. He moved gently. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than the wind, than sorrow, but it provided. Ariadne found rhythm in the quiet. She wove grasses into mats. She gathered olives. She listened to the wind. A procession emerged, satyrs, nymphs, spirits of the wild, all dancing, laughing, as if they had waited for her all along. For warning signs she might have missed. Sometimes she imagined she saw sails in the distance. But each time, what is meant to hold? It was only light and sea playing tricks. Then anger. The stars returned to her, not as signs to be feared, but as her crown, a gift from the heavens. Ariadne, once lost, now danced beneath constellations that bore her name. Low and smoldering, she thought of the thread she had given him, the life she had risked. Not just the escape, not just the defiance of her father, but the quiet hope that, in stepping away from one prison, she might walk into something gentler. A life beside him, a new beginning. There, beneath a flowering myrtle, he stopped. He turned to her with eyes full of knowing, and asked a single question. Ariadne, once princess of Crete, once keeper of secrets, now stood alone. Not in a labyrinth, but on an island that offered no walls, no boundaries, only stillness. The pain came slowly. She screamed once brief. Days passed. Naxos was not empty. At night, she lay on her back and looked at the stars. She no longer traced their patterns with wonder. Now she studied them for meaning still. The island did not speak, and then on a morning shaped like all others, the silence changed. She felt it before she saw it, a trembling in the air, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. And from the forest a figure emerged. He was radiant. Golden, yes, but not with sunlight. He shimmered softly, as if wrapped in moonlight. She did not move. It was Dionysus, god of wine, of wildness, of divine madness. Ariadne, he said, as if he had always known her, you are not forgotten. She did not answer. Do not mourn what left you, he said. What broke away was not meant to hold. She looked at him. He smiled. Come and see. Dionysus reached out his hand. His fingers were cool and strong. She took them, and in that instant the island changed. The trees swayed in rhythm to unheard music. Flowers bloomed where her feet stepped. The sea itself rose in gentle applause. She followed him through the forest, up a winding path of smooth white stone, to a cliff that overlooked the endless sea. "Will you stay?" And though she had once been abandoned, once betrayed, her heart did not tremble. "Yes," she said. And so it was. Dionysus made her his queen, not in chains, not in silence, but in celebration. No longer alone, no longer forgotten. Just as the gods had always intended. Chapter 7. A return to Athens, far from Naxos, across the wine-dark sea. The ship carrying Theseus and the young Athenians drew steadily northward. The winds remained favorable, though less joyful now. The decks were quiet. At night he would stand at the bow, staring into the horizon, the waves dark and endless before him. The salt air stung his face, but it was nothing compared to the ache within. The children, though safe, carried the weight of memory. Their laughter, once softening, had stilled. Something was missing someone. He had convinced himself it was the right path, the necessary path. Athens awaited him. His people needed him. And Ariadne, he told himself, belonged to another world. Theseus kept mostly to himself. He gave orders when needed, trimmed sails, read the stars, but he spoke little. He did not speak of Ariadne. No one dared ask. The decision to leave her had not been born from cruelty, but from confusion, from fear. If he returned victorious, the black sail would be replaced by white, a signal to the king that his son still lived. But doubt crept in like mist. Each dawn, as the sky bloomed in rose and gold, he would recall her sleeping on the shore, her head resting on his cloak. On the rocky cliffs, Aegeus stood, just as he had for days uncounted. And when he saw the dark sail, his heart broke. The weight of it crashed into him greater than the labyrinth, heavier than the Minotaur. The sea had taken his father, and he, by a single thread of forgetfulness, had loosed the knot that bound them. He had watched her for moments, longer than he admitted. Her breath was steady, her face peaceful, the one who had brought their children home. And in the nights that followed, he walked alone through the meandering paths of the palace paths that reminded him, too sharply, of the twisting turns of another maze. He had kissed her forehead once, softly, before boarding the boat. Yet no comfort came with that memory now. As the Attic coastline rose into view, gray cliffs and olive groves, dotting the hills, an old fear returned. His father, King Aegeus, waited at Cape Sunion, and he watched the sea each day, scanning for a sign, a silence. He built walls not to divide, but to protect. Athens began to grow, not in war, but in wisdom. When Theseus had first left for Crete, he had promised to change the sails upon return. But Theseus had forgotten. In his grief, his shame, and the shadow of what had passed, he did not change the sail. The ship glided silently toward the cape, the black canvas billowing high above. Others believe he carved it once into the stone above his bed, just once, and never again looked upon it. He did not wait, and he would wait. Not for a ship, not for a sign. The king cast himself from the cliff's edge into the sea below. When Theseus arrived at the harbor, the city was still. A single messenger came bearing the news. The Athenians mourned, but they hailed him too. Theseus, the hero who ended the tribute, the slayer of the Minotaur. They placed a crown on his head, made him king. But he felt no triumph. He stood before the people, quiet. He watched the flames rise at his father's pyre. There was no golden thread now to guide him out of grief. Yet time passed, and with time came change. Theseus, despite sorrow, became a wise ruler. He united the towns of Attica under a single banner. He founded festivals in honor of peace. But at the heart of all his deeds, there remained a stillness. Some say he never spoke Ariadne's name again. Each spring, when the flowers bloomed on the cliffs and the sea grew calm, he would stand once more at the edge of Cape Sunion, where his father had fallen. But for forgiveness. Chapter 8. A thread that remains in time, stories began to change, as they always do. What was once tragedy became legend. What was once silence became song. In the halls of Athens, the tale of Theseus and the Minotaur was told with fire and awe. Children grew up hearing of the brave prince who journeyed to Crete, who slew the beast in the maze, who led the Athenian youth back from death. Some said she was a daughter of betrayal. Others claimed she had died on the voyage. Fewer still spoke of Dionysus, of Naxos, of the crown of stars set above her brow. And each time the story was told, it changed a little more simplified, polished, exalted. Few remembered the girl with the golden thread. Ariadne's name faded in the telling. Tucked between lines, her part diminished to a whisper. But the gods remembered. In Olympus, where no memory is ever truly lost, Dionysus would lift his cup each year in her honor. Festivals in her name danced through the streets. Songs were sung not of war or death, but of reunion, of renewal. And in the sky, the constellation known as Ariadne would shine brighter as summer neared. A spiral of starlight, echoing the maze she had helped another escape, in the one she had walked out of herself. The people of the island worshipped her as queen protector of rights, guardian of thresholds. Women called on her name during childbirth, when pain met promise. Lovers whispered prayers to her when unsure where their hearts belonged. Below, on the earth, Ariadne flourished. On Naxos, she ruled beside Dionysus not in shadow, but in radiance. She became a symbol of what endures of grace after abandonment, of light after darkness. The island bloomed. Vines stretched thick along the terraces. Wine flowed freely at every gathering, and laughter became sacred. The thread, once golden, remains unseen perhaps, but never lost. And in these songs, Ariadne's name returned. Not always straight, not always short, but waiting patiently for those brave enough to follow it. Not as a footnote, but as a center. As for Theseus, he ruled long and wisely. But some say he never again allowed his heart to open. He remained just and fair, but distant. A hero sculpted in marble, remembered more for deeds than dreams. He visited Delphi in his later years, seeking peace. The oracle, in her drifting voice, told him this. You were the sword. She was the thread. And both were needed. Theseus bowed his head, and in his final days, he whispered one name softly, privately, not for legacy or song. Ariadne. Because though history often forgets what doesn't fit the mold of conquest, the soul remembers kindness. The soul remembers hands offered in the dark. And even in the heart of every maze, there is a path that leads out. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the world, two truths sit beside one another. That Theseus was a hero, and that Ariadne was the thread that made him one. Dream in threads of gold. You've listened well, traveler. The tale of Ariadne and Theseus, woven with courage, pain, betrayal, and the quiet strength of endurance, has come to rest. From the stone labyrinths of Crete to the star-bright skies above Naxos, the story has turned and turned, like a thread spooling gently in your hands. And now it is time to set it down. Let the sea grow calm in your mind. You've traced the path of memory, of myth, and of meaning. And now, like Ariadne at the end of her long night on the shore, you can let go. There is no thread you must follow now, no maze to navigate, only the soft dark waiting and the gentle breath of sleep. Let the footsteps of kings and gods fade into silence. The stars that watch from above are still there, quiet in their watching. Their light will follow you, but they ask nothing in return. You've walked with heroes tonight. Let your body settle. Let your thoughts grow quiet. Let your mind drift into the still sea of rest. Tomorrow will come. But tonight is yours, and it is peaceful. Good night.